The churches and cathedrals of England, whether in towns or as here in the countryside in Hambledon in Buckinghamshire, are unique. For 2,500 years they were the pivots around which people's lives revolved. Births, marriages and deaths were marked here, and for many this was the centre of their social lives too. Our aerial story starts at Canterbury in the year 597 with St. Augustine's mission from Rome to come and reconvert England to Christianity. There was a Saxon cathedral here, but this was rebuilt by the Normans and that, in turn, by Archbishop Anselm from 1130. Around the home counties there are still a few Saxon churches that go back over 1,000 years to the time soon after St. Augustine. St. Peter's on the Wall at Bradwell-on-Sea in Essex was founded in 654 and is one of the earliest Christian buildings in England. Its survival is due to it being used for centuries as a barn for storing grain and cattle. But our story starts for real with the Normans. William the Conqueror was determined to use the church as one of the principal means to subdue the native English. Within 30 years of the conquest, 14 cathedrals were under construction. They were intended to overawe and dominate the population. The way that the Normans set out to impose themselves on their new country can be seen nowhere better than at Rochester. There the cathedral and the castle stand side by side, the twin props of the conqueror's regime. Rochester is the second oldest see or diocese in England. Before the Normans, there was a cathedral here, but what you see today is largely 13th century. Finding early Norman ecclesiastical buildings unaltered in the London region is difficult. But at St. Bartholomew the Great in the city survives the most important 12th century church in London. Here, parts of the great Norman priory, founded in 1123, still survive in use as a parish church close to Smithfield Market. St. Bartholomew is typical of many of the Norman monastic foundations created after the conquest. There had been monasteries in Saxon England, but the Normans brought their own form of monasticism. The conqueror had sworn to found a monastery on the battlefield near Hastings if his invasion was successful. This was indeed to become the first Norman monastery, Battle Abbey, on the very site of William's victory and the high altar on the spot where King Harold himself had been killed. Many more were to follow. Not far from Battle is Bayham Abbey, founded in 1211. Today it's a picturesque ruin, but its main elements are clear. The great church, its cloister, its chapter house, the residential buildings including the dormitory, and nearby, the Abbey Gatehouse. Cowfold Abbey in West Sussex is a 19th century version of a Carthusian medieval monastery, and it gives a good idea of its scale with a huge spire dominating the surrounding landscape. Around the cloister, each monk had his own sparse cell for living and a small garden for quiet contemplation. Back in London, great Norman abbeys were being built. The Saxon Abbey at Westminster was rebuilt by Henry III from 1245 in a Norman style. On the other bank of the river from the city is Southwark. The Norman church of St Saviour only became a cathedral in 1897. Despite much later rebuilding, the core of the church is the earliest Gothic building in London. Wealth in the Middle Ages came from sheep, and in the great wool areas, such as East Anglia, churches were built that rivaled the cathedrals themselves. This is the Church of the Holy Trinity in Long Melford in Suffolk. The profits from wool not only dictated its size, but also the extensive use of expensive glass. The church was paid for by the wool merchant John Clopton, who lived close by in his magnificent moated house, Kentwell Manor. By building the church, he hoped to pave his way for an easier passage to heaven. Many churches have survived famine, plague, economic decline and abandonment. At Clophill in Bedfordshire, only the church remains in the landscape. Long before the 16th century, the church in England had been built up mainly by gifts. There were more than 10,000 parish churches and 1,000 monasteries. The English church suffered a devastating architectural blow under Henry VIII. Henry's break from Rome, occasioned by his divorce from Catherine of Aragon, triggered the Reformation and the dissolution of the monasteries. Many monasteries were dismantled and the materials either appropriated for royal use or simply sold off. Missenden Abbey in Buckinghamshire, which had been founded in 1133 by Augustinian monks, was sold, dismantled, and a country house built on its site. Today's house was built in 1814 in an early Gothic style, but it still stands on the original site of the Abbey cloisters. At other monastic sites, the conventual buildings were demolished, and either the whole or part of the Abbey church was kept. At St Albans, the cloisters, chapter house and other buildings were demolished, and the church is now a cathedral. Luckily, St Albans survived Henry VIII's destruction of religious buildings. Around 800 others didn't, and they are now either in ruins or lost to us forever. After the Reformation, England had an established church, and church building and land owning were inextricably linked with the state. Church building in England came to an abrupt halt. In Stanmore in Middlesex, there is a rare survivor, St John the Evangelist, built in 1632. It was one of the very few Stuart churches to be built in London, but was replaced by a Victorian church later. Its picturesque ruin, luckily, still remains for us to see. Essentially, from the 1530s until the 1670s, there weren't many churches built. In the end, it took a catastrophe to reignite enthusiasm for church building. And that came in 1666 with the Great Fire of London. greatest casualty of this was old St Paul's Cathedral, the largest in England, topped with the tallest spire of the Middle Ages. After some years of debate and design, the present cathedral began to be built. It took 35 years to finish. The city merchants wanted something as large and as distinctive as the old building, and Wren's famous dome was the answer, a sign not so much of London's spirituality as of its commercial virility. "87 medieval parish churches were also destroyed by the Great Fire, and of these 51 were to be rebuilt in the following 20 years. This work provided an opportunity for Sir Christopher Wren and his team of surveyors to create a new type of parish church. In starting out, Wren had very few models to follow. The only parish church in a modern style since the Reformation was Inigo Jones's St Paul's Covent Garden. Wren, like Jones before him, had to provide a suitable space for Protestant worship, but had to render it into the language of classical architecture. This he did brilliantly. The spire of St Mary Le Bow, for instance, shows his incredibly inventive mind. While classical in form, it echoed the Gothic spires of pre-fire London. By the reign of Queen Anne, London had grown considerably, and the new Tory government was worried that the expanding suburbs would become godless without new churches. So, an Act of Parliament was passed in 1711 to build 50 new churches. Only a dozen were actually built, including St George's in Bloomsbury. Here, a statue of George I stands on top of Nicholas Hawksmoor's extraordinary spire. It's based on the mausoleum of Halicarnassus in Turkey. These early Georgian London churches were imitated across England. In Merriworth in Kent is a beautiful and rare 18th century church, the design of which owes much to the London churches of the period. It was built for the Earl of Westmoreland, owner of the nearby Merriworth Castle. The flurry of church building in the early 18th century was just that, a flurry. By 1800, church building had virtually died out again. But in 1818, another Act of Parliament was passed. Like the 1711 Act, this was to provide new churches in the rapidly growing suburbs of London. £1 million was to be spent on new buildings. Churches built by the commissioners of 1818 are instantly recognisable. They're usually flimsy, boxy, and often drab. But there are a few exceptions. St Luke's in Chelsea, designed by James Savage, is the first structurally Gothic church to be built since England broke with Rome at the Reformation. Although there was a softening of attitudes to Roman Catholics from the 1820s, it was only in 1852 that the Roman Catholic Church was re-established in England. The Catholics were eager to make up for lost time, and soon churches were being built all over London. One of the most important was Brompton Oratory, started in 1880 on the Brompton Road in a classical style. With the death in 1850 of Cardinal Wiseman, the first English Roman Catholic archbishop since the Reformation, it was decided to build a cathedral in his memory. But it took until the 1890s to agree a design and to start work. The present cathedral, designed by John Francis Bentley, is in the Byzantine style. The 20th century has continued to see places of worship built in a grand manner, but in massively reduced numbers. In 1927, it was decided to create a new Anglican see based on Guildford. The new cathedral was begun in 1936, to the design of Sir Edward Morph. It was only finished in 1966. feature of English churches that sets them apart from their continental cousins is that they're generally set in churchyards, like here at Etchingham in East Sussex. On the continent, the dead are usually buried in cemeteries outside the town. St Giles in the Fields in Holborn is a good example of a London church in its own churchyard. In this parish, the Great Plague started in 1665, and so many burials were dug in the churchyard that the original church was structurally damaged and had to be rebuilt. By the 19th century, no churchyard in London could cope with the numbers of dead. Churchyards had become a danger to public health and a magnet for unscrupulous body snatchers. Parliament was persuaded to act, and between 1837 and 1841, 7 commercial cemeteries were established in a ring round the outer suburbs. All of these have now been absorbed by Greater London. Kensal Green was the first commercial cemetery in London, founded in 1830, and the only one still to be run by the company that founded it. It's positioned close to the Grand Union Canal, which was very convenient for bringing in the coffins. In 1854, Brookwood Cemetery in Surrey was founded. At the time, it was the largest cemetery in the world, covering 2,400 acres, and it was served by 2 railway stations to bring in the dead. One of these still survives, linked to Waterloo Station. To send your loved one to the cemetery on the daily funeral express cost 2 shillings and 6pence a coffin. One way only. Because of its proximity to Brookwood Cemetery, the first crematorium was built at Woking in 1885 under the Cremation Society, founded in 1874 by Queen Victoria's surgeon. At the same time, cemeteries were also being built to the east of London. In 1871, 7 local businessmen founded the East London Cemetery for people near West Ham. The crematorium was added in the 1950s. So far, we've been concentrating on Anglican places of worship and burial. But London has, of course, been the home to many other Christian denominations since the Reformation. And from the early 17th century, they were building their own places of worship. The Baptists are the largest nonconformist group in London. It's often easy to spot their chapels, as they tended to be suspicious of the Gothic style and built classical buildings like this one in Croydon in 1866. Another nonconformist denomination are the Congregationalists, who built their own chapels all over London. Again, they're often classical, and this chapel in Hackney, built in 1869, is in an Italianate style. Methodism was founded out of the Anglican Church by the Wesley brothers in the early 18th century. Their chief church is Central Hall, Westminster, designed in an ornate French style in 1905. In 1877, the Greek Orthodox Church built St Sophia's in Bayswater to serve the growing Greek community. And in the mid-1990s, money was raised to build a new Russian Orthodox cathedral in Chiswick. The distinctive onion dome roof now greets drivers approaching London on the overhead section of the M4. In the 20th century, the power and influence of the church has been much lessened. But the story of London's religions has diversified rapidly. London is now the home to many non-Christian faiths. The longest standing of these has been Judaism, whose followers have lived and worshipped in London for centuries. Jewish communities have usually stuck together, creating, for instance, their own burial grounds. This is East Ham Cemetery, and looking down on the gravestones, a distinctive pattern emerges. This is because Ashkenazi Jews are buried with the headstones standing, and the Sephardi Jews with the headstones flat on the ground. There have been synagogues in London for centuries. This one, in Stamford Hill, was begun in 1915. 25 years earlier, another religion was building a place of worship in the depths of Surrey. This is the Shah Jahan Mosque in Woking, built in 1889 in an Indian style with an onion dome. To get the exact orientation facing to Mecca, a captain of a P&O liner arrived with a big naval compass. Muslims are now probably building places of worship faster than any other religion in London. New mosques are being built and older buildings converted into smaller mosques. Here in the East End, a whole new Islamic centre is being constructed. A Buddhist peace pagoda was built by the river in Battersea in 1985 and has become a London landmark as prominent as any church. London's great strength is in its ability to absorb other cultures and religions. Despite an increasingly secular society, births, deaths and marriages are still more often than not religious occasions. But unlike times past, many of these are in mosques, synagogues and wonderful Hindu temples. Here in Neasden is perhaps London's most spectacular new place of worship, the gleaming Sri Swaminarayan Mandir, an amazing Hindu temple. It's open to the public and well worth a visit. So, although today places of worship play a relatively small part in the life of London, they remain a symbol of its strength, its ability to absorb and adapt and remain tolerant of people's faiths, whatever they may be.